Welcome to the Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help. Our wonderful guest for today, Veronica Llorca-Smith. She has over 15 years experience in public speaking for large organizations across APAC. She's the author of 2 books, has thousands of followers and runs a publication on Medium. She writes daily on LinkedIn. She's a mother of 2 children, speaks 6 languages, or maybe more, we'll ask her. And she is also a triathlete. So welcome to the Trouble with Writing, Veronica.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Veronica.
How
Welcome.
are you?
Hi, Veronica.
I'm in the Canary Islands. The weather is much better here.
Where in the Canary Islands are you, Veronica?
I'm in a tiny island called La Gomera, where my family is originally from, and from my mom's side. And I was born in Tenerife, but my family from my mom's side has always been here. So it's kind of my roots and where I always come back on holiday.
Wow. Is that in Tenerife? Is that the north or the south that you're from?
So from another island called La Gomera, actually, which is a tiny island, just 1 hour ferry away from Tenerife. Very small. There's not even a cinema. There's no Zara. There's very little, and that makes it very special.
Got it. Was I right, Veronica?
Feels very lucky to.
Yeah, I'm missing the Canary Islands weather at the moment. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. So yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, was I right about your languages? You speak 6 languages?
Yes,
Wow.
I do.
Can I ask which 6 languages they are?
Yes, of course. And I will explain them in chronological order so that I give a little bit of flavor to the languages, because the next question is, why do you speak all these languages? So first, obviously, Spanish, because that's where I'm from. So both my parents are from Spain. I was born here. When I was 5, we moved to France, to the Pyrenees. So I learned French there because I went to a local public school where everything was in French, and I was the kid who didn't speak French. I had to learn. Then from there, so I'm counting, right? We moved to Brazil, to Rio. So that was language number 3, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. Then from there, we moved to the Netherlands. I did not learn Dutch then, but I went to an international school, and that's where I learned English. So I did learn English in the Netherlands. And then later on, when I continued studying and kind of becoming independent from my family, I did an Erasmus, which is like a scholarship in another country, which was Italy. So that takes us to number 5. And then 20 years ago, which makes me sound really old, but I'm not that old, I moved to Taiwan and China. So Chinese is number 6. And I've been living in Greater China. So I've lived in Taiwan, then Shanghai, and now I've been living in Hong Kong for 15 years, and I still study Chinese, which is the number 6.
That's amazing. It's such a gift to be able to learn all those languages and all the culture that comes with it. It's not? Why not?
It's not a gift. I think that's a great point for the audience, because I get that a lot, like, oh, you're so gifted. And when people tell me this, I really want to share the message that it's not really about being gifted. Like, there's so much work and so much effort. And when I moved to Shanghai, to give you an example, I didn't even have Wi-Fi at home because I made the commitment that I wanted to learn Chinese. And so my only ways of entertaining myself was either studying Chinese or watching TV in Chinese. So when people say gift, of course, like everything, talent is a part, but there's so much more that goes behind it. So it's also a message of encouragement for the audience that, yes, gift is a part, but there's so much more that is under your control.
Hey, Veronica, actually, I totally agree with you. And what I meant was that it's a gift, like it's such a benefit for you. It's great for your, for your life, for your opportunities, all the culture that you're rewarded with, right, by learning languages. I totally agree with you that a lot of it is exposure, practice, motivation, and talent is only maybe one small part of it often. I really agree with you there.
Absolutely.
Pete,
So
you've got the next question.
My question? Okay. The next question is, so how did you get started as a writer?
So my story as a writer goes back to the pandemic. And I think the pandemic for many people, it made us rethink life. It made us maybe reconnect with some passions or even find things in ourselves that we didn't know were there, because we always live in such a fast paced environment that I didn't have a lot of time to think and to stop and to pause. And when I did, because I was unemployed and there was a COVID and all these things, I was spending a lot of time by myself. And I found that writing was a way for me to express myself when I didn't have all that rush. I didn't have to rush into the next thing and go into the next meeting and things like that. So it started almost like a therapy for myself to go through everything that I was going through at the time. To give a little bit more context, everyone has a pandemic story. And for me, my pandemic story is that I got locked abroad of Hong Kong, my home country, with my two daughters, because we left on holidays and then they changed the quarantine policy and we couldn't come back. So I found myself in a new country, which was Australia. I was without my husband, new country. I didn't find a job. I faced a lot of rejection because I wasn't even getting interviews. And so all of these challenges, for me, I had to find a way to channel them. And I didn't have any friends either, which is usually the people that you partner with to channel the good thing and the bad stuff. And I found that writing was really a way of expressing myself, everything that I was going through. But that triggered the next thing, which was I actually love writing. This is a passion for me. And then one thing led to the other. So I started writing very casually on LinkedIn. That was my first touch point, let's say, with writing. And then from there, what I found out is that LinkedIn is great for very conversational, very concise, very informal writing. But I also liked a little bit deeper writing. And so I found that Medium was the next platform for me to write a little bit more elaborated articles, go deeper into the topics that I'm passionate about. And from there, and I think this probably happens to a lot of writers, one thing led to the other. So LinkedIn became longer articles on Medium, and the longer articles on Medium challenged me to say, well, why don't I go for an ebook? And so I published my ebook on Amazon. And then publishing an ebook and then going for a book is, again, another milestone. So after the ebook, I was like, well, why not a book? And it was almost like the building blocks of writing, which led me to where I am today. And I'm still working on these building blocks.
That's amazing. Did you write when you were younger as well, Veronica, or did it just appear in your life during the pandemic?
So I did, going back to many years ago when I was a child, I remember that I loved writing, and in France, in the schooling system in France, they really encourage kids to be creative with literature, and there's a lot of poem and there's poetry and prose and all of that. And a very beautiful story about my journey in writing is that when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, I wrote a poem in French, and it got like really great reviews at school. And my mom loved that poem. She always loved that poem. And she kept it in a little notebook, even though we traveled around the world, as I explained earlier. And then years later, my dad passed away. She moved back to the Canary Islands and she bought a house in Tenerife. And when I went to visit the house the first time, and I get a little bit emotional when I tell this story, in one of the walls, I saw my poem written with black ink. And it was a reminder that your passions are always there. And for me, every time I pass in front of that, it reminds me that we have these hidden passions and that sometimes years and decades go by and you forget about them. But if you dig a little bit deeper and if you pause and if you take the time to really look back and do a little bit of introspection, you find these pieces of who you are.
Yeah. Would you say poetry is your favorite type of writing?
No,
poetry, or
I don't really do poetry, and I think that was one of the questions. My favorite type of writing is really self-improvement, and more than self-improvement is really helping others with self-improvement. I do find that when you go through something yourself, when you go particularly through a challenge, but also how you learn something, how you experience something, you really have a first-hand experience that I think is very valuable for two reasons. The first is inspirational. When someone tells me that they've run a marathon and that's something that I want to do, I aspire to do that. So that is aspirational. But then you also have the second pillar, which is you have already done it. And so you have a framework that can take that inspiration into something actionable. And so for me, this formula is fantastic, and is really where I found my secret formula, not so secret now, of the way that I've written my 2 books. Which I think we'll talk about later, but it's really how my story can hopefully inspire people who want to achieve that, and then how I break that story into the steps so that it could become your story.
That's so great, Veronica. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and touch on what you said about your great story about your poem ending up on the wall of your mum's house, and how, you'd always carried that passion for writing and for expressing yourself, helping others. And yeah, it is very inspirational. And we often say, or I do anyway on this podcast, that I think the idea of I've always written, I always loved writing, I've always been a writer, it's a bit of a meme. It's a bit of a fallacy, because adulthood gets in the way, right? And during university, nobody wants to write because you've got not boring, but papers to write. And we lose sight of writing for a while. But it's really inspiring to hear you say that. Yeah, if you keep that, we have that sort of passion within us to create something or to write, and it might come out later. So for anyone listening, I hope that inspires you to do the same. You don't have to have written your entire life from age 5 to 50 to start doing it and to make it work. Another question for you is, what challenges have you run into while writing in English? I mean, we've talked about all your languages. What do you find challenging or most challenging about writing in English?
I think it's two main things, or 2 groups of things. And the first one is the obvious, is the language barrier. So whether it's vocabulary, or, as you know, Phil, because you help people that mostly come from a lot of Latin languages, I understand. So it's really how the language is structured in a different way. In languages like Spanish or French or Italian, sentences tend to be extremely long. You can have a sentence where you put a bunch of commas and the sentence is really long. And so by default, that's the way that I tend to write when I write in English. It's almost like your brain is processing that translation, even if you don't intend to. So that's one, to give very specific examples. Prepositions is something that are very, very different in English. The to, from, by, all of that. So I still do make a lot of mistakes with the prepositions. So I'm aware of my own mistakes. And so that's one part of it. There's something in English also that is very unique to English language, which is the phrasal verbs. For example, get by, get through, get with, get up, get all of these things. So I struggle a lot with the actual language. Is a barrier. But the second group of challenge that I think is the more difficult to overcome is the confidence. And I think this applies to languages in all type of format, not only written, particularly spoken more so. But when you think that you are not a native speaker, you already, initially you have a narrative of, I'm less of, I'm less fluent, I'm not as good, I have a handicap, I have a challenge, because you do. And when it's really about the mindset. And so for a long time, I told myself, I could never write a book in English because I'm a foreigner as in non-native speaker. And so when you are telling yourself that you have all these challenges and all these burdens, you are already talking against yourself, and you're already putting all these additional burdens on top of the actual ones that come with language. So for me, I had to work on both. I had to work on how to actually have a better mastery of the language, but also how to work on my mindset to say, well, sure, I don't have the same level, or I'm at a disadvantage, but how can I turn this to my favor? Because I think there are also advantages when you come from a foreign language.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So yeah, how did you overcome those challenges of, I mean, first the language challenges like phrasal verbs, prepositions, and then the mindset challenge, because that's massive, right?
Yeah.
How did you overcome that?
Yeah. So the first one is easier in the sense that I always think that technical skills are easier to learn than soft skills, especially if it touches all your psyche, all your confidence in this case, and things like that. So the first challenge, if you want to improve your English, or your language in general, you have to put in the work. And so for me, of course, reading is a great way of improving your skills, because you are unconsciously, you are learning when you're reading, you're seeing new expressions, you're learning new words, new terms, and all of that, it's being worked somewhere in your brain. So reading, but also writing, because I do find that the more I write, the more I ask myself, is this the right way of saying that? Does this make sense? Is there a better way? I challenge myself, is this sentence too long? And very often it is. So writing is also a great way of improving your skills. And then there's also technology. So I have a monthly membership with Grammarly that I really recommend to anyone who wants to write, because it's a tool. It's not going to do the work for you, but it's often going to tell you first if you have a mistake, but also, do you want to turn your tone into a more confident one, or do you want to be a little bit more diplomatic? So that's a small tool that can help. And then it's the next level, like how far and how much do you want to invest? And there, in my case, I actually invested in a writing coach, we could say, or writing mentor. And I did that when I was at the point of starting writing books. I think if you're still at the level of articles on platform like Medium, where I am, it's fantastic, because I see it as a very safe platform. I think I've probably made a lot of mistakes in the past, but it's been a learning platform and also a platform to give me confidence. So at that level, it's great because you're working your muscles. And then when I went into the actual writing and publishing and something that you want to monetize, that's where I invested in a writing mentor and also an editor. So this is for my last book in particular, which is a memoir that I am planning to publish in October. So that has been my biggest writing project to the date. I've been working on this project for a year. It has been extremely challenging, much more, I would say, than the self-improvement books, because I find that talking about your life, it's extremely hard when you have to pick what makes sense, what is relevant, I could almost do another session on a memoir. And I did find that in that type of writing, I needed help. I needed editors for the actual editing. Like, does this make sense? Is the writing proper? But also an external editor that would be able to look at the story holistically and tell me there's a gap here. This doesn't make sense. This is not adding to the story. So I think for me it was really investing in little by little, and also know when is the right time to invest. If someone in the audience is just starting to write, I would not recommend to have a writing mentor at that stage. But for example, working with someone like Phil, who is extremely active on LinkedIn and always giving tips on how to write in English confidently, and is giving a lot of fantastic tips, even for free. I think you can start to see first what resources are available, like I did. And once you're ready to invest in your writing career, your writing journey, whenever that is, then know what is the right next step for you to invest in. But I do think that you have to invest time. And I think that if you want to take it to the next level, you also have to invest money. So not to lose the audience, I talked about the first one, right? Which was how to improve the technical skills. The second point, the second pillar that I mentioned is about your confidence. And that one is much harder, because confidence is something that you don't just go to a course and you build confidence. I think confidence, you have to build it through a lot of things, through practice, through failure, through feedback. And that's exactly what I did. I started writing. Some of my articles got 0 reads. I wonder, how can you write something and no one read it? But it's the reality. And some other articles started to get good feedback. And as I started to get more what we call claps in Medium, which is the equivalent of likes, I started to get a little bit of a boost of confidence. I started to understand what resonates with my audience, what doesn't resonate so much. That's also how I found that I love writing about self-improvement, because I also saw that I was able to connect with my audience. when I was sharing stories that could be both inspiring but also actionable. And so it's finding those little moments where you're failing and you're growing again, and you're failing. And it's never like this type of growth. It's always like you have this massive boost and then you fail again, and you have one of these articles that barely anyone reads, and then you get up again. And I think it is really working with that mindset of it's never going to be like this perfect curve that is always, trending up. Like even today, I still have moments of going down, and I have to get up again. And it's also trying to find your milestones. As I said before, my first milestone was writing on LinkedIn. And then from there, I started writing on Medium. And then when I had a little bit of momentum, I still was being rejected by publications on Medium. And I asked myself, well, what am I going to do about it? Like, no publication wants to publish me. And I thought, well, how hard would it be to create my own publication? And so I created my own publication on Medium 1 month after I joined the platform, because I figured, well, if I'm being rejected and I'm a new writer and I need to build my confidence, I bet you there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other writers that have the same challenge. So if I create this publication that is really an inclusive space for new writers particularly, but also seasoned writers to come and share their story, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who will put their hand up. And today I have 200 writers in the publication. Some of them have thousands of followers. Some of them are brand new. My doors are open to everyone. But these little initiatives, these things that have helped me build confidence little by little, for me, it has been a journey of a year. And when I look back, I'm really proud of what I have achieved. Even though I have these moments of these dips, it's great to see that you build, and it's always this concept of building blocks.
That's great. That's so good to hear. You're helping newer writers as well. I wanted to follow up on Pete's question about mindset, or what Pete asked about mindset, and ask, do you have any tips, or what have you done did you have any blocks yourself in terms of your mindset about being a non-native speaker or a non-native writer, in terms of approaching companies, getting jobs, or getting published in certain places? Is that a block that you had? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Mm-hmm. I think, we're touching a lot of topics here also in terms of inclusion and diversity. And I think very, very often I feel that I have been at a disadvantage because I was a foreigner. So I felt that I always had to prove myself. When I sent a CV, for example, in Australia, I always felt that I had to prove that I was as good for the job as someone who was equally qualified, and the language was not a handicap for me. But I think that the first step is for you to believe it yourself, that language is not going to stop you. I think that's one thing. And also, I always try the strategy of reframing things. And if the person in front of me is open enough to understand that if you speak English as a second language, is because you speak some of the language as a first language, then that person is going to understand what you've been through. That person is going to understand that you have curiosity, that you have learning agility, that you have perspective, because you need to have perspective to speak a different language. So I think you have to first have your own narrative on how you can turn your language challenge or your language handicap into something that you can sell to companies. And so for me, I like to translate this language, or this element of the language of English as a non-native speaker, as something that can be turned into an advantage, because for me, it's about skills. It's not only about language anymore. It's cultural agility, is learning agility, is having an open mind. So I think first you have to believe that narrative yourself, so that when you are speaking in a language that is not yours, you feel confident about it. Like now, English, of course, is not my first language, but this is the podcast number 20 I've done in less than a year. And the first one that I did, I had to work on my mindset on, okay, English is not my first language. What if I say a word that is wrong? I also like to use humor. And I've said this before. that very often, if you speak in a language that is not your native language, you might say things completely wrong, and it happens. And I just use humor. Like if I say an expression, like once in a meeting, I wanted to say the expression of the early bird catches the worm, but I said it the opposite. I said the early worm catches the bird, and I got like all nervous. And in the end, I was like, oh, I'm sorry. As you know, English is not my first language. I'm trying my best here. Help me out. And it was a great way of breaking the ice.
Lovely.
You should have been on our last
that.
episode about cliches and idioms.
I like that reconfiguration of it. Early worm catches the bird. Why not?
Exactly. It's a strong worm.
Yeah. A couple of things that you said that I liked also. One, earlier when you're talking about building confidence, taking action, right? So it's like we can't there's no like mindset pill where we say, okay, I'm just going to say to myself, like, be confident. You actually have to take action, make mistakes, get feedback, learn from them, build confidence that way. So taking action. And the second thing I liked was this idea of looking at your advantages as a non-native speaker. I think this is so important because so often people focus too much on the disadvantages. But like you said, you have all this unique perspective, this cultural agility that you can bring to the table that other native speakers might not have. So I think that's really, really powerful.
And the one thing to add on, and this doesn't apply to writing, but it applies more to meetings, for example. I do a lot of workshops, hybrid seminars and things like that. And more often than not, I would say 100% of the cases, the audience is multicultural because nowadays we work remotely. Teams are in India, in Japan, wherever they are. And so English is not the first language for many people in the audience. And when I introduce myself, I often say something about English being not my first language, so that people embrace their diversity and say, it's okay, feel free to participate. If you want to speak, put your hand up. If you prefer the chat, and create this environment that is really inclusive, where language is not a barrier anymore. And I love to do that because it really makes people at ease. And I do find that when you do this little gesture, you're giving people permission to express themselves, even if they're going to make mistakes, because I said I might say some mistakes myself, and it's okay. It's about communicating.
Veronica, you've given us a lot of great information about adjusting our mindset when we approach writing, especially for multilingual writers. Can you tell us about any technical tools you use, like software or apps you use to help you with writing? Or do you use such things? A lot of writers ask me, hey, teacher, what should I use to improve my writing? There's so much available. Are there any things that you have turned to?
To be honest, I don't use a lot of technology. Maybe I should use more. My way of learning is really more by doing. And as I was saying before, I write daily. When I started writing on Medium, I wrote even twice a day, which is a lot, but I was unemployed, so I had time in my advantage. And for me, one great tool, I don't like to call it that way, but it's the audience, and see what resonates with people. Very often, to give you a very specific example, I write an article on Medium, and when I read the comments from the audience, there's something that resonated with them. One sentence, one idea, one term, and I turn that into another article. So very often from one piece of article, you can get a follow-up, you can go deeper into one of the ideas. I think the example that I was talking about is an article where I mentioned in the middle of the article, you don't expect to go to the gym and to have a six-pack the next day. And a few readers, they love this term. And I was like, oh, this could actually be an article in itself. So the next article was, I went to the gym and I had a six-pack the next day. And it was all about expectations and how you have to work hard. And so to go back to your answer, my personal strategy is much more by doing, by seeing what other writers are doing, by seeing what resonates. And I will say that in terms of software, what I like to do is explore new software. So, and by software, I mean platforms, really. I started with LinkedIn, then I went into Medium. A few months later, I created my newsletter on Substack, and each of them teaches me something new. It teaches me how to be an agile writer. I write very differently when I write on LinkedIn or when I write on Medium or even on Substack, where I really try to take my ride my readers on a journey. So I do love to have like these different touch points where I really have to flex my muscles. Same with my own website as well.
That's great. I wanted to talk about the instant results that you talked about, getting the 6-pack in one day. That reminds me a little bit of putting a prompt into ChatGPT and getting an article. Have you? What are your thoughts on the AI revolution? And have you experienced writers like submitting AI-generated articles to your publication?
Okay, I don't want to get upset on that. Not on the articles. I do find that the writing that I've seen is very genuine. Also because my publication, A Smiling World, is all about uplifting. Is all about personal stories, positive stories. So there's a lot of personal like storytelling that goes in there that I don't think is that problem. Where I have seen a lot of AI and I don't know how to handle it is on the comments. When someone writes a comment that is this long and is paraphrasing everything that I said, word by word, written like by a robot, I still don't know how to answer in a polite way to that person. So I'm not replying yet because I don't know how to handle that. Because for me, writing, especially nowadays with all these interactive platforms, is to have interaction. So the fact that I put a lot of work into writing something that I do with a lot of effort in a different language, and then I have a robot replying to me is something that I have not come to terms with. So that's
Yeah.
a point.
It's almost worse than no comment at all, isn't it? I think the same when I get those comments. It's I'd prefer not to have one.
Yes, and you also asked my opinion in terms of using it more and more in general. I think just like technology in general is a great accessory and is a great tool. I think the moment it becomes the main tool and you're just the accessory, I think that's where you have a problem. So for me, as a writer who writes because I love writing, and I think is the same for most writers, I totally see it as an accessory. I'm not threatened by a robot because I just wrote a memoir, and this memoir is about 40 plus years of my life, going through nine different countries, speaking 6 languages, stories that are super personal. I take pride in writing it, and it's my story, and there's no way that I would let a robot do it because a robot cannot put the human capital that I have. Sure, it can improve, and if you need some prompt, for example, or if you need to get a lot of ideas for a specific project, I think it's fantastic. But I'm a purist. I have to say, when it comes to writing, as I said at the beginning, it was a way for me to express myself. I don't want anyone else. I don't want a robot to do it for me. I'm more than happy to have that as assistants. The same way that I'm super happy to have editors that I'm working with and they give me guidance, but ultimately it's my writing and my signature and Veronica who is in there and not AI. So that's my very honest opinion.
Thanks for that. Great opinion.
Yeah, I like the word assistant there. But using AI as an assistant, I think is a good way to look at it. So it doesn't do it for you; you do it, but it just you can bounce ideas off it, that type of thing. Mm-hmm.
Maybe just a quick thought. Maybe that's an advantage of writing. And I saw the other day a sort of Instagram influencer who is AI generated, is getting lots of reposts and earning lots of money. That's something that AI can generate, even if people know that it's not real. They like it and support it. As writers, coming up with our personal opinions, our personal takes, our personal lives and stories is something that AI perhaps can't do, certainly at the moment. And maybe that's a good opportunity for everyone out there to get cracking with that kind of writing and avoid the more generic kind of informational writing that AI can do quite well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very interesting. I recently saw something about AI related to the film industry, and it reminded us that the AI is mining existing material. Well, it can't mine a personal experience because that may or may not be online to some degree. So you're right in pursuing your own writing as a means of expressing something unique to you, because AI can't replicate that, at least not now. It's too personal, and your life is a combination not just of things you did and actions you took, but people that you've interacted with in unique combinations, right? The people we meet are often a result of our personality or our psychology. All of that kind of complexity, I can't see that being replicated. It's too personal. It's too chaotic. We make sense of it after the fact in our life, but if I think back to personal experiences I've had, there's no logic to it sometimes. And I defy AI to sort of replicate that chaos with meaning that our lives are, you know.
I love the point about chaos, because I think for many writers, or it's definitely my case, I find purpose in writing. I'm in love not only with the product that people like and people read, I'm in love with the messiness, I'm in love with the chaos. I love going for a run and having these ideas in my head and then turning these ideas into words and sentences and stories. And if you write because you find purpose in writing, there's no way, and this is more philosophical, but there's no way a robot can have or can give me that same sense of purpose, because as I said at the beginning, it's almost like a therapy, like this process of where chaos becomes like a symphony of words. And there's also for me that additional layer of why I love writing, and it's not going to be replaced by AI.
Yeah, I agree. Pete, I think you have our next question, do you not?
Yeah, I like this. Sure, yeah. What's one tip you'd give a multilingual writing professional who is just getting started?
I think it's really putting everything that we've discussed previously. But the first thing I think is really the mindset. If you're multilingual, you already have multi skills. So instead of thinking that you're one step behind, is really how you can turn that into your advantage. And how I've done it myself. So, for example, when I joined Medium, I discovered a publication that is called Language Hub. And it's for language lovers. It's about language learning. And so I started to submit a lot of articles there because I have a lot of experience in languages, in language learning. So that was an example of how you can take that to your advantage. Also, even though English is the main language for most things, you still have an amazing advantage when you speak that second language. To give another example, I think this is my podcast number 20, one of the ones that I did more recently was my first podcast in Portuguese. So you can also be a little bit creative and try to find opportunities where that other language can come in handy for business opportunities, for connecting with people. At the moment, to give a third example, I'm working on a workshop it's going to be in Hong Kong for a French company that works in Hong Kong. So they have a multicultural team. And although everyone speaks English, and I could take the easy route of speaking English with the CEO and the leadership in charge of the webinar, I'm speaking in French. And that really creates bonds. So instead of thinking that you are at a disadvantage, it's almost like you have the level playing field because you speak English. And on top of that, you have like these magic cards that I pull sometimes. Oh, by the way, I speak Chinese, or you speak these other languages. So I think my examples are just to say that you can be creative with what you have. If you come from X country, you can go to the Chamber of Commerce, which I have done, and say, hey, I speak this language. Would you be interested in doing an event? Oh, absolutely. And you can create all these new opportunities because language is a vehicle and language helps build bridges if you use it that way rather than a disadvantage.
Amazing.
Great point. Yeah, about the opportunities that can spring from languages and writing. It's not just about selling a blog post. That might turn into relationship, that brings you some of the stuff you talked about. So yeah, I like that. Paul, you got a question?
Yeah, well, we're just about out of time because that's my fault, because I have to do my live stream at the top of the hour. But Veronica, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your latest project. Is it a book you're working on?
Yes, I touched upon it briefly. It's the memoir that I was talking about before, which I started exactly a year ago. And it's been a very long project. I've been working with 2 different editors. I just finished the writing. And the next step is really to work on the pre-launch of the book, which is very interesting because also for the audience out there, especially new writers, I used to think that writing a book was writing a book. And then I wrote a book and I felt like an Olympian, and then nothing happened. So the other thing, the key message as well, is that if you want to write a book, it's also sales and marketing. And so I'm working a lot now on how I'm going to promote my book, how I'm going to get opportunities of exposure. Can I maybe get a pre-launch? Are there bookstores in Hong Kong where I live that would be interested in the book? Can I do a book signage? So it's not only about writing the book, which is the first part. Be ready. So writing is the very first step, but is a journey and a very interesting one, because you learn about so many other skills. So I'm in that phase and very, very exciting project.
You're going to have to go on the trouble with publishing to talk about that one, not the trouble with writing.
Yes, that could be another podcast.
Where can our listeners find you, Veronica? Free plug time. Tell us where you are online.
Fantastic. So, well, you can find me on LinkedIn as Veronica Llorca-Smith. You can find me on Medium with the same name. Also, my website is exactly the same, veronicallorcasmith.com. But more importantly, if you are interested in self-improvement, if you are interested in reinventing yourself, I do have a book that is called The Lemon Tree Mindset, which is on Amazon. And I'm very proud because it only has 5-star reviews. And anyone who has written a book knows how difficult it is to get reviews. So I have 24 Beautiful. Of them. So you can find me there. And one last thing, because it relates to language. The reason why it's called the Lemon Tree Mindset is because in English, you say that when life gives you lemons, you should make lemonade. But I actually disagree. I think that when life gives you lemons, you should use the seeds to plant your lemon tree. And so that's also a wink to language and how you can look at things from a different perspective and use those lemons to plant your lemon tree.
That's beautiful.
Great title.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, recommend that our listeners check out Veronica's books, and Medium publication will link all of your the places we can find you online in the show notes, and we'll let Paul dash off to his live stream. So thanks very much for coming on the podcast. Best of luck with your new book launch and everything you're doing.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thanks, Veronica. Good luck.
Lovely to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Okay, see you next time, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Keep writing.
Bye. See you, everyone. Thanks for listening.